Hey guys, it's Greg Alexander, and today I want to answer some questions that I've had. People want to know what type of setup that I would use for moving baits. And we're talking about moving baits. We're talking about baits that you wind in. And moving baits come, in several different categories, but basically the two different categories that you need to be concerned about with a moving bait would be treble hook lures and single hook lures, because the setups are going to be different for them. So I have pulled out 4 rod and reel combinations today that you could use to fish these baits with to help you be more efficient, to not lose as many fish, to cast better. So let's start with the first one. So when we're talking about chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, single hook lures, swim jigs even, then I'm going to use a 7.2 to 1 reel, 16-pound Sunline fluorocarbon, and this particular rod is a medium heavy fast Mojo bass rod by St. Croix's. And there's several rods that you could use, but a good quality rod, makes a big difference. The Mojo bass rod is maybe just a little heavier than some of the rods, but the action on it, the casting action with it, the ability to skip with this rod, to me outweighs the little bit of extra weight that this rod carries compared to some other setups. So spinnerbait, chatterbait, swim jig, medium heavy fast, 16-pound fluorocarbon. Of course, you could upgrade to braid or heavier fluorocarbon in situations where you have heavy grass, stained water, heavy wood, things like that, where you might be a little bit more concerned about it. But I think the lighter the line, the more bites you're going to get. So let's look at the next setup. Now, my next setup here, this is also a Mojo Bass glass rod. Now, I throw the Mojo Bass glass rod for small crankbaits, not Squarebills. You could throw it with Squarebills, but small crankbaits, 200 series, 300 series, 400 series crankbaits. So up to about that DT10 size would be about the biggest I would throw on this particular rod. Now, this is a 6'10" moderate action glass rod. I throw it with a 6.2 to 1 gear ratio reel with either 10 or 12 pound mono, 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon. But my favorite line to throw in this situation is 10-pound P-line. It's tough, super tough, low stretch, copolymer line. It is just an awesome line to throw in all situations, unless you're trying to get your bait up a little bit higher with straight mono, or down just a little bit deeper with straight fluorocarbon or lighter line. But my general go-to line for medium-sized crankbaits and even bigger crankbaits is going to be 10-pound P-line. That's a nice setup also. Then, if you're throwing Squarebills, see now Squarebills, shallow running crankbait like this one, or pretty much any one you throw, smaller ones, not like the big Squarebills, but the regular size, smaller Squarebills. I throw this again on a moderate action rod. This particular rod is a Tatula XT, and it's a cranking rod. And I throw this on a little faster reel. This is a Shimano SLX DC, which has a little microcomputer in it that helps you control the spool speed in windy situations, helps you make a little bit, longer cast in the wind. Now, this particular rod or reel I probably wouldn't use for like a pitching and flipping situation with that thing in there. It's more for casting. So the reason I use a little bit faster rod or reel with the Squarebills is because I'm always trying to look for that reaction strike shallow with a Squarebill. So I got this thing kicking along. Now I also throw like a DT4 or DT6 on this setup when the bass are on shad or chasing shad and I want to move it really quick, you know. So that's when I would throw this particular setup here. Nice setup again. This is about a 7-foot rod. And pretty much 7 foot's a good round number for just about any length of short distance to medium distance casting situations. And now the last rod reel setup that I would use for moving baits, treble hook moving baits. This is a Dixie Custom Pro rod. It's like a specialty rod. You know, they're not available just anywhere. It's a nice rod. It's a 7'7" heavy glass rod. And I would throw this rod for bigger crankbaits. This is a 6XD, a 8XD, a 10XD, those deeper diving crankbaits that you would be throwing, you know, out off of ledges and points and things like that. And I generally, again, would throw this with 10-pound P-line. You can also substitute that with 10-pound fluorocarbon if you need to get it a little bit deeper. But generally, the 10-pound P-line is going to do it for you, and it's a lot. I think it's a lot more durable than the fluorocarbon. And the reel that I would throw for these deep diving crankbaits is a 5.3 to 1 Revo winch, right? It's a slower retrieve. It's not going to wear you out. It has a, you know, much more stronger gear ratio, so that throwing these bigger crankbaits is not going to wear you out and you won't overwork them. So they're basically the 4 rod and reel line setups that I would use for crankbaits, spinnerbaits, chatterbaits, swim jigs. Now, one thing I didn't mention were like lipless baits. And a lipless crankbait, I would probably throw that also on the higher gear ratio reel, the Shimano SLX DC 7.2 to 1, because generally with a lipless crankbait, again, I'm moving it fast, generally ripping it out of grass or just moving it quick. So that faster reel is going to do it for you. So these 4 rods will cover all your bases. Rods, reels, line will cover all your bases on these moving baits that we're talking about today. So again, if you like these tips and you want to follow me on a regular basis, please subscribe to my channel, hit the little like button and the little bell thing. And I appreciate you watching. Again, have a blessed day.